InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts. In today's podcast, I'm going to be looking at a few public as well as one private company announcement, looking at Village Farms International Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as VFF, looking at Waterways Technologies Incorporated, trading on the TSX Venture as WWT, looking at Hexo Corporation, trading on the TSX and New York Stock Exchange as Hexo, as well as also looking at the Nug Club, one of California's first and true cannabis subscription boxes. So first today, starting with Village Farms International, who announced it's repaid in full the 19.9 million Canadian promissory note plus the accrued interest of $621,000 that it originally issued to Emerald Health Therapeutics as part consideration for the November 2020 acquisition from Emerald of the 36 million common shares of Pure Sun Farms corporations that Village Farms did not own. So Village Farms no longer owes any amounts to Emerald with respect to the Pure Sun Farms transaction. And they also announced that it's exercised a portion of its option to make an additional equity investment into Altum International, one of Asia Pacific's leading cannabinoid platforms, increasing the company's equity ownership in Altum to just under 10% from 6.6%. The Altum team is making strong, steady progress on the execution of its business plan, and we're pleased to be able to increase our equity stake in the company on similar terms to that of our original investment, said Michael DeGiglio, the CEO of Village Farms International. Our international cannabis CBD strategy is to target selected emerging markets with significant long-term potential through partnerships with local experts who are early movers in their respective regions. And our investment in Altum represents a capital-efficient means by which to participate in the significant opportunity in the Asian Pacific region, which represents approximately one-third of the world's GDP. And Village Farms continues to retain the remaining portion of the option that did not exercise, which offers the company to the ability to further increase its ownership in Altum in the future on similar terms to its original investment. So, a lot of good news for Village Farms, obviously paying off their last bit of debt to Emerald Health Therapeutics. Helps really solidify their ownership with Pure Sun Farms, which is, as far as a Canadian producer, been doing really, really well in the Canadian market, and now focusing on Altum International, increasing their equity a little bit in that company, and obviously having intentions for being involved in the Asian Pacific market in the long term. There's a lot of companies who are starting to make subtle moves into that sort of long-term future there, but you haven't seen anything too aggressive so far, as there is a lot of expectation on how long it's going to take for regulations to shift in that region of the world. It's looking like it's still going to be in the next sort of 3 to 5 year window as opposed to the next 1 to 2. But that being said, you're starting to see a lot more interest in that region of the world, so I would expect to pay attention to some other companies starting to have different investments in the Asian Pacific region, and I would pay attention to Altum, as they are pretty much one of the few companies that's actually making aggressive strides within the CBD and cannabinoid space in the Asian Pacific region right now. And again, at least for Village Farms, I would expect to hear good news from their Pure Sun Farms ownership, as that company does seem to be doing, like I said, pretty damn well within the Canadian space. Looking next at Waterways Technology, who announced it's received its 5th commercial and first international order for its medical cannabis IoT irrigation and fertilization system. Now, the $160,000 order was received from a licensed producer in Southern Africa who is currently building a 10,000 square meter medical cannabis cultivation facility. And the order was received through a greenhouse irrigator who is building the complete facility. Now, the system of the Internet of Things controlled irrigation and fertilization system for cannabis cultivators and growers. Waterways believes that the system is one of the first in the world that was designed for the specific needs of cannabis growers and cultivators worldwide. And the company expects to deliver and install the system by the end of May of 2021, and it was developed in Israel by the company's engineers using the company's unique know-how gained in the irrigation industry and tailored specifically to the client's specific needs. Now, Ohad Haber, the company's chairman and CEO, commented, "I'm pleased that our technology is gaining traction in the international cannabis market. This is the first international order for a medical cannabis irrigation system. We received this order following the success we gained in delivering irrigation systems to the medical cannabis industry in Israel. Among them was Kronos in Israel. And we will continue to focus our efforts on selling similar systems around the world." So I've talked about their irrigation system before. Pretty cool setup. I definitely think it does have a lot of room to grow in Israel, possibly in parts of Latin America as well, where in certain areas where they're going to be building cannabis production or medical cannabis production facilities, the irrigation systems might be underdeveloped, so this might be a method to go with as well. I definitely think there's a lot of potential as well when you're looking at Africa, which is starting to have more and more production facilities starting to pop up. I've mentioned that before, that on a global cannabis market, South Africa and parts of Africa look to be another big potential grow hub similar to Latin America as well as Israel. So I would expect to see more production facilities starting to pop up in South Africa. I don't know if they're all going to be using these Internet of Thing controlled irrigation systems, but it'd be pretty awesome for the industry if that is what started to be used. But again, I do think that there's you're probably going to see a few more potential pop-ups in South Africa, and hopefully for Waterways, you'll see a few more purchases either coming from, again, more the underdeveloped regions of Latin America or Israel or South Africa. Next, looking at Hexo Corporation, who announced it's appointed Charles Bowman as general manager of its U.S. operations effective immediately. Charlie's extensive experience in commercial growth and operations will be instrumental as we continue to expand our footprint in the U.S. We're excited to bring such established leadership to our team as we ramp up to support the growth initiatives of Trust CBD, our joint venture with Molson Coors, and for potential non-beverage CPG partners with whom we're in ongoing discussions with, said Hexo CEO and co-founder Sebastian St. Louis. Now, Bowman is based in the U.S. and will be responsible for the all implementation aspects of Hexo's U.S. operations, including stand-up and commissioning of production facilities, overseeing operations, supply chain and logistics, and building the team. Over the coming months, we expect to begin deployment capital to build out our production and processing facilities in the state of Colorado for our powered by Hexo technology, and consider the U.S. to be strategically important for the future growth, continued St. Louis. Not necessarily going to go into too much of Bowman's background, but realistically, just starting to show that another company is, and Hexo has been talking about this pretty aggressively over the last couple of months, but really talking about their U.S. expansions, obviously now making moves with regards to that, and you're starting to see a lot of companies have a lot more aggressive strategies towards the U.S. market opening up in the next couple of months or years. Everyone's kind of getting their ducks in a row, so that way as soon as there are some regulatory changes, they can launch operations as quickly as possible. Hexo Corp definitely one of the ones with some nice strategic footholds, and is definitely implementing some good strategies now to be ahead of the curve. There's a few other large-scale Canadian producers that are also either through partnerships or through their own subsidiaries are again making some moves into the U.S. market. And that is really the big expectation over the next year, is going to see how much regulations do change within the U.S. market, and also how much that influences the global cannabis industry. I am expecting that once you start to see regulation changes in the U.S., you're going to start to see similar regulation changes in other parts of the world, in the EU. Mexico is another big market that should be coming on board in the next year or so. Again, most of Latin America has already adopted this change. The ones that haven't will probably follow quickly behind if, again, Mexico or the U.S. Have big changes in the next year. And again, there's also a lot of talks about the Asian Pacific market starting to open up. And again, that could come from having another large-scale country like the U.S. Actually fully federally legalize or decriminalize cannabis, or at least allow for safe banking regulations. Again, those things are expected within the next couple of years. I don't know how realistic that is, but it's definitely being an agenda that's being pushed by the majority of this industry right now. Speaking of which, looking today at Nug Club, the nation's first true cannabis subscription box featuring full-size products curated by experts and personalized to each customer, who announced the launch of its Schedule 1, a new cannabis brand that seeks to provide instrumental support towards the mission of declassifying marijuana as a controlled substance by the Drug Enforcement Agency. Now, specifically, proceeds from Schedule 1 will be donated to lobbying efforts that seek to reclassify marijuana, and to the Last Prisoner Project to free individuals in prison on nonviolent cannabis charges who are serving jail because of marijuana being defined as a Schedule 1 drug. Now, the Controlled Substances Act places all substances which are in some manner regulated under existing federal law into one of 5 schedules, and drugs like marijuana, opiates, and heroin are classified as Schedule 1 drugs and are defined as those with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Yet according to the Marijuana Policy Project, there are over 4.3 million patients in the U.S. who rely on cannabis to ease symptoms caused by a myriad of conditions, for cancer to post-traumatic stress disorder and epilepsy. And in fact, the U.S. already has patents to cannabinoids, including THC, based on their ability to prevent age-related brain damage and trauma. The Federal Controlled Substances Act was written more than half a century ago and is based on flawed, unscientific, and extremely outdated data. Cannabis is now commonly used to successfully treat intractable seizures, cachexia, chronic debilitating pain, and many other life-threatening disorders. It's proven its utility within the medical community, yet it's still classified as Schedule 1, said Joe Brotman, creative director of Nug Club. We're launching Schedule 1 to not only increase awareness, but to provide instrumental support to the mission to end the prison state. Now, at launch, Schedule 1 will include 3 flavors or flower strains available in the Nug Club subscription boxes and online for members to purchase via the Nug Club add-ons menu. There are Mimosa, Mac 1, and Sunset cookies. And the launch of Schedule 1 follows the company's recent announcement of a more broad-ranging partnership with Last Prisoner Project. This month, Nug Club will be sending a special box to subscribers that is rebranded to showcase the names of people imprisoned across the country for nonviolent cannabis offenses. And products in the February box will feature brands that specifically support social justice work, including Schedule 1. And the box will also include a call of action for Nug Club members to participate in LPP's Letter to the Prisoner program and donate to the organization. Not the only company that's focusing and has been working with the Last Prisoner Project. There's been lots of cannabis companies who have always been donating a portion of their proceeds to the Last Prisoner Project. I do like that they're focusing specifically on bringing Schedule 1 awareness. That is the big expectation, is that this is going to get rescheduled and be reclassified within the next year. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen, but it is definitely something that seems very likely within at least the next 2 years. And again, also having some sort of banking reform seems very likely within the next year. Federal legalization, I don't know how likely that is, even within the next 4 to 6 years. But again, if you have enough momentum built up, which cannabis definitely does within the U.S., you've seen most states have legalized in some fashion right now. Also, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on in the psychedelics industry, you've had lots of cities, including Washington, D.C. and Cambridge, Massachusetts, who just recently decriminalized all entheogens. So that's kind of the new phrasing everyone's using for psychedelics right now, as it refers to more how these drugs actually directly impact your psyche and overall health and wellness. And that movement is picking up a lot of momentum. Again, it's only starting in cities, but the fact that it's in Washington, D.C. right now, and again, now you're seeing all entheogens not being prosecuted and not being really policed. I do think it's going to be a very short matter of time before the same type of thing starts applying to cannabis and throughout the country. So, like I said, hopefully within the next year. But as you can see, there's a lot of companies pushing for that momentum right now, whether they're doing it through awareness programs or, again, through their general just business strategies over the next year when it comes to how they're planning on expanding into the U.S. market. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated's CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.